So what we're going to draw today is something that I call a heart prayer. So basically, don't worry about the art part of it. You can draw any which way you like. You could actually just scribble on a piece of paper, and that sometimes is a very healthy thing to do. It just feels really good when you have these feelings and you're sitting with God and you really don't know what to say, you don't know how to feel, and just sitting there and being there as you draw could be quite healing. And scribbling can kind of follow your mood of whether you're angry, whether you're sad. So don't worry about the art part. If you can scribble, you can do the heart prayer that we're going to do in just a moment. What I'm doing here is I'm kind of tracing over some of my lines. This is kind of a little tip for you to do later after the session. If you forget some of the patterns that I show you and you just want to fill in different sections of a scribble, you could darken some lines. You could start to make some lines thick or thin. And what that does is it allows you to just kind of sit with your feelings with God and just kind of take your time tracing over lines that you've just scribbled. And whatever prayer means to you, I want you to know right up front that that is okay, that wherever you are in this moment as you draw your prayer, that's just where you need to be. Sometimes when I scribble, I start to fill in different sections of the scribble with words, with feelings. It could be something that you're thinking about, a moment, a memory, different people that you're praying for, different things that hurt your heart or that you just need to get out. And you'll see a little later that I start to kind of fill in some of these spaces with some words and prayers. Now what we're going to do today is we're going to put our scribble into a different shape, and instead of words and tracing lines, we're going to actually be drawing some patterns. So a little bit of steps to it, but I promise you nothing more complicated than scribbling and drawing patterns. So let's gather our supplies and get started. So if you have a mixed media type of paper or any kind of watercolor paper or drawing paper, that would work great. I always say use the nicest paper that you have, and if the nicest paper you have is a piece of copy paper nearby, just grab it off the printer. And also use the nicest pen that you have for drawing, because it will help you make the best mark that you can make as you draw. That Sharpie pen works phenomenally. It's the one I use with all my classes because the tip is pretty sturdy. You could find it at Staples or Walmart. The Micron 01 is an art pen. It has a very nice, small, fine point tip. It's also very delicate. The third item is a little blending stump or smudger or tortillon, and that is for blending pencil. And it's not necessary. We'll use it at the end. So whatever paper you have, let's get started by drawing a heart with a pencil. That's one more thing you'll need. And so I'm just going to draw a heart. I love drawing hearts, by the way. They never have to be perfect. They could be crooked. They could be off center. Inside the heart, I'm drawing a little scribble. It's really just to divide the heart up into different sections. And we're going to start right away with our very first pattern. We'll pick a section to fill. Use the pen that you have handy. And just pick a nice small section to start with. And we'll start with our first pattern. And it's basically just drawing orbs. I could call them circles, however, then you'd probably think that they have to be perfectly circular, and they absolutely don't. The important thing here is to draw them as slowly as you can. So that may seem like an oxymoron because you are trying to fill a space, but the purpose of mindful drawing or meditative drawing is that you're not in a hurry. You are focusing on each mark that you make. And although we have drawn circles probably 1,000,000 times in our life, every time we write the letter O, we draw that circle, but we generally don't focus on it. And so if it does help you, you can see I just drew a circle going clockwise. And it's not usually the way I draw a circle, so it turned out a little wonky there. You can totally see which one I'm talking about. If you draw it in an unusual way, going in a different direction, it will usually cause you to focus on it more. And that may help you draw slower. So for some people, this may be the hardest part of what we'll do today, and that is to draw slowly, especially something as common as circles or orbs. You'll notice that I'm drawing them in all different sizes. I'll draw some large ones, and then in between the large ones, I'll throw in some tiny ones there, basically filling the space with all different sizes, just to make them all fit together. So as I'm drawing here, I'll kind of give you a little history of where this heart prayer came from. It started with a process called the Zentangle method, and I am a certified Zentangle teacher. Actually went to the 8th certification that they ever had. And the Zentangle method was created by 2 co-founders. It's Maria Thomas and Rick Roberts. And it was created to help people to find a state of quiet or mindfulness by drawing these repetitive patterns. And the patterns are drawn within this string, which is what we drew with this little scribble inside of the heart. And as we put the patterns together, they start to form a beautiful piece of artwork. Now I'm starting the second pattern here, and there's really not a way to pause here. So as soon as you glance up and you see the pattern I'm drawing, I would love for you to go ahead and give it a try, because there is no wrong way to draw a pattern. There are steps to the pattern that I'm showing you, but if you change it, if yours looks different, that's absolutely okay. And once you get the idea of the pattern and start drawing it, you could just kind of take it in your own direction. And here I'm just drawing a series of parallel lines that look like little highways. And when I come up to another line that I've already drawn, I simply lift up my pen and then carry on. There's really not a lot of explanation needed, because as you watch it, the pattern becomes pretty obvious. Many times I record a video and I don't explain what I'm doing at all, and people can totally just copy what I'm doing. And in this case, it's hard for you to pause and come back. And so if you don't finish drawing the pattern as I'm talking you through it, please know that once you start it, you can always come back and finish it. So by the time we finish this video in the 40 plus minutes that we're together, it's quite probable that yours might not look as finished as mine, because you're stopping to watch what I do. And that is perfectly okay. In my classes, I usually give a prize for the slowest drawers. If you're slow and not finished, that's great. That means you won. But very rarely in life are we told to not hurry. I mean, you think about all the times that we do have to hurry. And by using this process as a prayer, it's a way for you to spend time talking with your Creator and to not feel rushed doing that. And so if things take a little time, or you decide to fill something in, or you start a pattern that could take a long time, that's great, because the idea is that you don't have to finish within a certain time. You really don't have to finish ever. You can come back and keep adding to this. And I just decided to put a little spiral in the middle of the highways there, and start filling in some little pebbles here and there. I like to call them pebbles. I know I called them orbs, but the idea with the Zentangle process is if you start to call something a shape that somebody knows, like a pebble, then you might think, oh, I have to draw something that looks like a pebble. Or it doesn't look like a pebble to me. It looks like a wonky oval, and that's fine. So here's our process, or our prayer, kind of coming together here. And although we're talking and drawing at the same time, if you were to do this on your own and in the quietness, put on some worship music, or you can put on some relaxation music and just listen to that, because you won't need to hear me. You can certainly just kind of relax within your own thoughts. So I'm going to give you a taste of that and kind of be quiet here for a moment. I do also want to mention that if the word prayer kind of brings up feelings with you, or that you don't know what you want to pray about, that's exactly what this process is great for. When you don't have the words to pray, you can certainly just sit with these patterns that you draw and just sit with God and say nothing in particular. He knows what's in our hearts, and if that makes you feel uncomfortable even naming God, or if there's feelings of anger or hurt or disappointment in this transition that you're going through, that it's perfectly fine to just acknowledge those feelings and just know that they're there. And sometimes we're in that place in our spiritual relationship where we don't really have those beautiful words. Maybe they're angry words, or maybe we don't know what feelings we have. And so this is a great way to just kind of sit with God and say, I just don't know what to say to you right now. And just be there with Him and have that healing happen in your heart just as you be with Him. So I'll give you some time. What I'm doing here is I'm filling in some orbs around one of the other sections here, and I've spaced them out a little bit. And my next step is just to kind of blacken them in a little. And this is kind of a good time to just kind of sit with that filling in process. Not to rush, but just to kind of go slowly and be in that moment. I didn't leave you. I'm still here. Just wanted to give you a moment of quiet, and so that you can experience what that feels like as you're drawing. This process is also just a great way to learn how to be alone. And a lot of people are very uncomfortable spending time by themselves, let alone in prayer. And so the more you do it, I think the more comfortable it feels. So if it feels awkward at all, just know that it's kind of a probably just a new process of sitting in silence, and you can absolutely, as you draw your prayers, put some music on, and if that helps. But some people really just enjoy the quietness. So what I'm doing here is I'm tracing around the half circles, and I'm putting as many auras, as I call them, that I can fit. Eventually those auras are going to bump into each other, so I could probably just fit like 2 or 3 of them around each shape. And then when I run out of room, I'll just basically aura and in between into the middle space. An aura basically just means to trace around something. It's a very, very fancy art word. But as you draw, you can also attach meaning to what you're drawing. And this is where I believe, even though we're just sitting quietly, I believe that God does speak to us, and it may surprise you with what you hear in your heart. Sometimes when I draw a shape like this, I just imagine Him just kind of coming around me and holding me together, or just the angels surrounding me. And so whatever gives you comfort as you draw your prayer, these thoughts might come into your heart. Just treasure them, and know that that's just a gift as you're sitting here in this moment. It may be a verse that comes to mind. It may be a thought. It may be a memory. And sometimes I'll just write those thoughts and memories around the heart. If it's something in my journal, this can become a page that I journal on, or on the page next to it. So I just wanted to share some of those ideas with you as you draw. I love when you draw artwork. I think the most important part is the process and the meaning that you attach to it. So here I'm zooming in on different sections of our string or our scribble here. And I purposely want you to also try to let go of what the whole prayer, what the whole heart will look like in the end, and just really focus on the very line that you're drawing at the moment. And don't worry if you feel like you, quote, made a mistake. There's absolutely no mistakes. All of these lines are going to come together into this heart that we're filling. It really is a process of filling our heart, because this moment is really a gift that you're giving yourself to sit in this quiet time. And as you start to see your heart fill up, those lines all work together. The imperfect ones, the perfect looking ones, they all come together. And that's another reason why I love doing this in the shape of a heart, is there is no perfect heart. So now I'm starting another pattern here. And all of these patterns do have names, by the way, and that just makes it really fun. So I'll go ahead and put these up on the screen here. I should have mentioned that earlier, but I'll kind of back up and try to do that. And that's what makes it fun, to kind of learn the different patterns. So if you do Google the Zentangle method, you'll see that this pattern is called MUNCHIN. And I basically just divided my space up into triangle shapes, and each triangle I just divide up with lines. These patterns are really meant to be so simple, so that once you learn them, you really can just relax into that quiet space in your mind without having to think too much. Now each time I divide up the triangle with lines, I try to start it at a point that I did not already start lines from, so that the lines are going in all different directions. So if you have 2 points that are next to each other, you might just kind of think, oh, I'll start the lines from a different point that's not next to one that I already started lines from, if that makes sense. I think sometimes explaining these patterns is a lot harder than just having you watch me draw them. Move my camera a little better here so you could see. So I moved to a different corner there, and now I'm just going to draw those lines from that point. What's great about this is it creates some natural shading. So every time I start a line from that corner, you can see that corner has this darkened point to it. Drawing and shading all at the same time. And by the way, if there is one of these patterns that you like more than others, you could fill the whole heart shape with that one pattern. a lot of times people have asked me, how do I get all of those patterns together? And it really is just as simple as scribbling inside the heart. But I have done a whole heart filled with this MUNCHIN pattern, and it looks really faceted, almost like a jewel. And that may be where you are, and you may want to do a prayer that way, which is kind of these jagged triangle shapes. Okay. I'm just kind of filling in this little swirly thing that I drew earlier. When I draw these, it's just wherever your heart leads you. If you want to jump over here and add a little bit, or jump to another section. And so by filling this in, maybe I'll make it stand out a little more. It certainly wasn't planned. It was just something I decided to tuck in there. And I do get asked this question a lot. I could have certainly filled that in with like a red or a pink or something that would make it pop even more. You can absolutely add color to your heart prayers. The beauty of Zentangle is that you could just grab a pen and create colors with patterns. You don't need a lot of supplies. And the other great thing that makes it mindfulness drawing is that it gives you less to think about. You don't have to think, oh, well, do I color this? What color do I use? And so by just keeping it simple with the black pen, it becomes more mindful, but it can also be more artistic and more fun and more prayerful if you get your colored pencils out and color it in. There's no rules against it. That really just kind of would be an extra step if you wanted to add it in. Now this next pattern that I show you is a crowd favorite. Everybody seems to love this one. It's a more organic, kind of flowing shape, kind of like a paisley or a little rounded stem-like shape, like a apostrophe or a comma. But again, it doesn't need to look like any particular shape. It's really could be just a loop or a shape that gets larger at the end and comes back down to a stem. And so I'm just adding some in to fill the space. So it can take on whatever shape or space that you have. And I usually start to change the shape as I draw it, depending on what strikes me. That one's kind of less like an apostrophe and more like a loop. But there's no right or wrong way to draw it. Generally, they do have some filled in circles in them to kind of take up some of that space of the bulbous part of the shape. And you can tuck them in anywhere. You can even have them go in different directions. This pattern is called FLUX, and kind of adds kind of an organic feel to, and I'm tucking some more in there. So feel free to make them in whatever shape or loops or space that you would like. Now I could certainly leave some spaces open between the flux, but I'm going to fill it in with some tipple, otherwise known as orbs or pebbles. And you can also feel free to leave open spaces in the heart. You do not have to fill all of them in. Totally up to you. Sometimes I wait till I'm at the end of drawing the heart prayer and then kind of see where do I want to add more filled in spaces. Where do I want more contrast of black or white? And then I can decide at the end. That could also be a good place to then decide if you did want to add color to it. So I'm going to go ahead and show another pattern. You're really getting a good value here. Sometimes I only show 5, but I think we have 6 or 7 spaces to fill here, so I'm giving you all my favorites. And again, if you did not finish drawing flux, just know that you can come back to it with your own quiet time. And think of this as just, as I call my art starters, just a place to start your art, and then you'll be able to finish it later. So here in this section, I'm drawing a grid. I'm going in one direction with lines, and then I'm going in another direction with lines. And now I'm crossing through them, kind of from corner to corner, to make a diagonal. And I always think of it going from corner to corner, otherwise I get lost in my diagonal. But what it does is it basically divides them into some triangles on more of a grid versus random triangles. These are a little smaller than the ones we drew with MUNCHIN. And I love this pattern. It's called NZEPPEL, which is a weird name. And don't ask me where all the names come from. Sometimes they're named after people who create the patterns. Sometimes they're words backwards or words in other languages or just a fun word. In fact, I've gotten to help name some of them at conferences, and that's been really fun where we vote on different names. This one reminds me of kind of a cobblestone kind of street. What I'm doing is I'm rounding off. So I'm filling each triangle in with a shape. I'm tracing the lines, but when I get to a corner, I kind of round it off. I like to think of it as a squished balloon inside that space. And it just kind of cuts the corners off and makes it look kind of cobblestoney. I love this pattern. I mentioned that already, didn't I? It really, because you feel kind of the self-fulfilling feeling that you're filling things in and that you're accomplishing something, even though the moment is really just to be quiet and just to draw. It does kind of give that feeling. And by the way, you could also create your own patterns. So don't feel like you have to use one of these. I mentioned that earlier that yours could look different, but you can totally just make up your own pattern. You can even make up a name for it and call it what you want. Zentangle did not create that process of creating patterns. They have been around since the beginning of time. The Zentangle method is really just that process of taking a deep breath, dividing your space with a string, and filling these named patterns in. And look how pretty it looks when it all comes together. I decided I needed a little more black, so I'm filling in. Where I rounded those corners, so any of those sharp corners that got cut off, just kind of going over those. Just a little tip here, an art tip on the side is if you feel like your little squash balloons or cobblestones were kind of crooked, you can just kind of go over them and shape them here. But really, again, it's just another way to sit in the quiet. Sometimes I start something and go, oh, well, now I got to do all of them. But that's, again, really the point, is that you don't have to worry about finishing quickly. You can just be in that moment of drawing. And you can set your pen down and you can always come back to it. So let me give you a few minutes of quiet here to work on whatever portion of your prayer that you would like to work on. So it's starting to come together here, and if yours looks very different from mine, that is absolutely okay. That's even better. You may have created new variations of patterns or just really followed your heart with what you were drawing. So now we'll start another pattern in that final space. I love this pattern called PATENA because it's really a good way to fill a remaining space. If you feel your prayer is coming to an end and you don't want to spend a lot more time with it, you basically just cross some lines through the space, and where they intersect you can put a dot or two or three or more. And I like to vary the size of the dots. I think it looks kind of like Tinker Toys for any of you that remember that. That's a favorite toy from my childhood. Or kind of like a space age atoms or things connecting. So whatever you want to call it. I do have this little loop-de-loop bubble there. I'm just going to fill with some orbs, and I think I'm going to pretty much call it done with the patterns that I've drawn. Now each time you draw your heart prayer, you can use different patterns, and I would love at the end of this time together to share a way to keep in touch with you. And there are dozens and dozens of different patterns I can show you. Your heart can even look different using the same patterns, just depending on where you place them. But one final finishing touch before we do finish, and that is to take a pencil and give your heart a soft edge around the outside. I use a blending stump or tortillon to soften that edge and bring it towards the inside of the heart. If you remember, we drew our heart with a pencil, so unless the pattern had an edge and pen, it is a soft line where your pattern could go outside of the pencil line that you drew, and that's absolutely fine. But that edge does give it a little shading. If you don't have a tortillon, you see I'm rolling a little scrap of paper into a little tube and just rubbing that paper along the pencil, and that's just to soften it and blend it and give it some shading. It does make the heart look dimensional at the end, and you'll see the more, I can even use my finger there, the more shading you put on it, it does start to have a little contrast to it. And you'll see as I add that shading in how it just sort of helps that heart to jump off the page a little with that dimensional quality. So I'll give you another few minutes here to add some final touches to your heart prayer, or you could just simply sit back and relax and watch how I go about shading it. After I go around the outside, I may add a little bit here or there to kind of bring out some shadows inside the heart. And you're welcome to work in these final 4 minutes or so on the section that you like. Some people have the opinion that you cannot add too much shading, and some people don't like shading at all, so you can certainly leave it simply black and white if you like. I did add a little bit of extra shading, not only down in the spaces between the little freeways, but also where they kind of overlap. And I also added a little shading there to the tips of the MUNCHIN triangles. And I think I'll add a little bit of shading underneath the FLUX petals, just by adding a little pencil there under the chin, as I call it, and just blending that out. When you do use your blender, you may not notice because I go so fast when I blend, but tiny little circles generally smooth it out into a really nice shaded kind of tone there. So if you go back and forth, you're really just mimicking the pencil line, but when you take the little circles and blend it out, you can really kind of soften the shade from dark to light as you move away from the pencil line. So it looks quite different. Too bad you can't see a before and after. But here I'm going to just add a little verse. Maybe it's something that you think about as you pray, or something that comes to you afterwards. Sometimes after you draw it, maybe there's not any words, like I mentioned, that come to mind, but maybe later, afterwards, when you see it, there's some words that you want to add to it later, and you can certainly change it long after you draw it. It also becomes a nice little piece of artwork you can copy or turn into a card and give to somebody that you're praying for, or that you know needs a little encouragement. And it could also be something that you frame and put up where you can see it. It could become a picture of a memory or your thoughts of the moment. It's funny, I never really plan these things out, but they sometimes always seem to fit around the shape that I'm writing. I don't know if there's just practice of writing things. People ask me this a lot, but if I do have lots of extra space, I'll usually fill it with some dots or shapes, and if I run out of space, I'll go around it again or write it down below. So I try not to plan it out too much. If it fits, that's great. And that's what it looks like finished. Now, wasn't that fun? So if you were a little nervous about the art part, hopefully it wasn't so bad. And if you were a little iffy about the prayer part, hopefully you could see that you can make this prayer whatever's comfortable for you. And I would absolutely love to keep in touch. First of all, I'd love to see what you drew today. If you would share it with me on my Facebook page. If you go to my website link, there'll also be a Facebook link there. And you can also sign up to receive another heart prayer as well as some more patterns to draw. So I look forward to keeping in touch with you.